This paper looks at thromboinflammation in long COVID. So first, what's thromboinflammation? Well, a thrombus is a blood clot that forms inside of one of your veins or arteries, and thromboinflammation is essentially the immune system causing these blood clots. Starting off, studies have found persistence of vascular damage with increased circulating markers of endothelial dysfunction, which essentially means that the inner lining of those blood vessels is becoming damaged due to the COVID infection, which is causing coagulation abnormalities, where we're seeing a resultant increase in thrombin generation, so those blood clots, as well as abnormalities in platelet counts in these long COVID patients. Now, an interesting term that we're going to explore later in the paper is neutrophil extracellular trap formation, which is a fun new phrase which is describing how these blood clots are being formed, where these microvascular thrombi and microclots are causing perfusion abnormalities in the lungs and brains of patients with long COVID. So perfusion, again, is that oxygen-carbon dioxide exchange, so you're not able to clear out the carbon dioxide and get new oxygen in, so the tissues aren't being regenerated or rejuvenated. And a major finding is that we're also seeing that COVID-19 survivors experience an increased rate of arterial and venous thrombotic events, which are associated with an increase in deep vein thrombosis, stroke, atherosclerosis, and infectious diseases. Where the scary thing is that in long COVID, the endothelial damage seems to have lasting structural changes, where perhaps a persistent viral reservoir and an overreactive immune response that's happening in the long term is resulting in this. So moving into a little history, early on in the COVID-19 pandemic, we found that people are more prone to macrovascular thrombotic complications ranging from venous thromboembolism to stroke and myocardial infarction. So essentially, people that have COVID, a recent COVID infection, are more prone to developing these blood clots, and these blood clots are causing issues, whether it's in clogging up the veins in your legs, causing strokes in your brains or eyes, and then also heart issues of myocardial infarction, clogging up the blood vessels to the heart, where these fibrous blood clots are being defined by a large degree of neutrophil traps, composed of a platelet leukocyte aggregate formation. So these are our immune-mediated cells that are causing this network of molecules that can cause the blood clots to form. And the really scary thing here is that these blood clots are very hard to break down. That's what fibrinolysis is, breaking down of these fibrin formations, these blood clots. So not only are these unique fibrous networks being formed, but they're hard to break down. For some biomarkers, we're seeing that COVID-19 is persistently increasing levels of von Willebrand factor, VWF, while also reducing levels of ADAMTS13, which is a von Willebrand factor cleaving protease. So these are increasing in levels, and then the things that typically break these down to control their levels are decreasing. Additionally, the number of neutrophils in long COVID patients is increased, specifically low-density granulocytes. So summarizing this into a fun graphic, we're seeing persistent vascular dysfunction where we're having these little cracks form in the inner lining of the vessels, where we're having increased levels of these von Willebrand factors and decreased levels of the proteins that can break those down, which is contributing to platelet and neutrophil hyperactivation, which form these fibrous microstructures, which then promote hypercoagulability, which increases thrombin generation and decreases plasma fibrinolysis, so the ability to break down these structures. And when enough of these little microclots get built up, they can coagulate into a larger macroclot, where these macrovascular thrombi now can cause an increased incidence of cardiovascular events. And we're seeing that these effects are lasting in the long term. So when we look at patients up to 16 months post-infection, we're still seeing these abnormalities such as elevated D-dimer levels, showing ongoing fibrin formation, these networks that cause the blood clots, as well as increased immune responses, so interleukin-6, which shows ongoing systemic inflammation in some patients. Where some of the major issues that we're seeing is increased risk of cerebrovascular diseases, so that's brain vasculature. We're seeing arrhythmias, heart fluttering, ischemic and non-ischemic heart diseases, pericarditis, myocarditis, heart failure, so issues with your heart, and then thromboembolic disease beyond the first 30 days after infection, where this persistent vascular dysfunction seems to be playing predominantly a role in continued cardiac injury, and then pulmonary dysfunction. And a lot of people's first thought is, okay, well, why don't you just use anticoagulation? Well, people have obviously tried this, and not only did it not show beneficial effects, but it was actually associated with an increased risk of harm. So the common sense go-to strategy does not work.